Greetings from our channel again. After Les Paul passed away, his children unlocked his vault. Their eyes were stunning. There was a fortune so large that it brought them to tears. Royalties that never stopped rolling in, million-dollar patents, and priceless instruments. That was only the start, though. This crazy tale of how a $5 contract became one of the largest fortunes in music includes family feuds and record-breaking auctions. Les Paul was born on June 9 as Lester William Pulsfuss, 1915 in Wisconsin's Waukesha. He was descended from Germans. His mother, Evelyn, was connected to the Stutz automakers and the Milwaukee brewing sector. Lester spent several hours gathering spare parts in the garage his father, George, owned. When he was a child, he saw potential everywhere. They even turned their wooden staircase into a test. The steps became a musical instrument when he cut them to alter their pitch. His mother wasn't happy about the damage, but she did call it creative. His parents' last name was changed from Pulsfuss to Pulfuss by Evelyn after their divorce. She sought to ease the anti-German attitude that was prevalent during World War I. Though he began using it later in life, Lester never formally changed his name to Les Paul. He was performing by the time he was 5. He sang "How Are You Going to Keep Him Down on the Farm" while standing on tables at Rotary Club meetings. "Your son would never learn to play the instrument," a music instructor once warned his mother. But that didn't deter him. When he was 8 years old, he disassembled a harmonica to learn how it operated. After that, he reassembled it and learned how to play by himself. His first radio was built by the time he was 9. Electricity wasn't necessary. An antenna that he erected between trees allowed it to capture sound directly from the atmosphere. When he was 10, he wanted to play both guitar and harmonica simultaneously. He therefore created a harp holder that required no hands. After bending a wire coat hanger and adding wood scraps, he made the necessary adjustments. Extra hangers were brought home by his brother, who worked at a dry cleaner. Les made countless prototypes out of them, testing and refining each one as he went. "Red, your guitar's not loud enough," was all the challenge he needed when he was playing at a drive-in diner in 1925. Taking the mouthpiece off his mother's phone, he connected it to a radio speaker. He yelled into the mouthpiece, which he held to a broomstick to make his voice louder. Enough. He connected his guitar to the amplifier of the radio and inserted a phonograph needle into the bridge. Even though the sound was harsh and full of feedback, it nevertheless managed to work. He had just begun the process of making the electric guitar when he was 12 years old. Despite the doubts of others, he persisted. He began performing roadhouses as Red Hot Red when he was 13 years old. At the time, $5 a night was a nice wage, and he was making it through his musical career. He developed 2 distinct stage names at the age of 15. He turned on the St. Louis radio to country music as Rhubarb Red. He played jazz in clubs in Chicago as Les Paul. He alternated between the two according on the audience. Always trying new things, always looking for something different. He quit school to go on tour when he was 17. After playing with Rube Tronson's Texas Cowboys, he joined the band of Sonny Joe Wolverton. Back home at Beekman's Barbecue, he had his big moment. He sat next to a tin pail and played guitar for tips. On some evenings, he earned $14, enough to purchase additional radio parts. He never considered creation and music to be distinct entities. For him, they collaborated. After Paul relocated to Chicago in 1934, everything began to come together. He performed in the Chicago World's Fair, a huge occasion that placed him in front of an audience he had never seen before. He also secured radio jobs that would influence his destiny at the same time. Paul was at the center of all the music that was going on in Chicago. Alongside Sonny Joe Wolverton, he started hosting programs on WRJN in Racine and WBBM in Chicago. During the day, he played country music that appealed to Midwest rural audiences as Rhubarb Red. But at night, everything in his universe altered. Entering the jazz scene, he experimented with several techniques and discovered a new method of commanding an audience. Performance was not the only factor in these transitions between jazz and country. They were molding him into more than a guitar player. He met some of the greatest musicians in history while working on the radio and in Chicago bars. Art Tatum, a pianist he met, had fingers that moved so quickly they hardly looked human. Paul learned to approach music in a way he had never thought of before thanks to Tatum's introduction to intricate chords and improvisation. Then came the guitarist Django Reinhardt, who performed with unparalleled skill despite losing 2 fingers in a fire. Reinhardt developed a new style in response to this restriction. Nobody had ever heard it before. Paul heard, saw, and gained knowledge. In addition to admiring these musicians, he performed with them. He spent night after night jamming with Chicago's top musicians, learning ideas and methods that he incorporated into his own sound. He had evolved beyond being a jazz or country performer. He was a new thing, something in the middle. Above all, however, he was discovering what innovation meant. He had learned from Reinhardt and Tatum that music was more than just playing well. Breaking down barriers and doing what others believed was impossible was the goal. Paul demonstrated the extent of Reinhardt's impact on him in 1953. The music industry was shocked by Reinhardt's untimely death at age 43. Paul always remembered the lessons he had learned from him and the difference he had made. He also contributed to Reinhardt's funeral expenses in a covert act that very few people ever knew about. He only wanted his guitar to be louder, so Les Paul never set out to change the music. Acoustic guitars were not designed for large venues, which were popular in the 1930s. Despite having pickups, they were unable to break through the cacophony of a full band. He did everything he could to correct it. To avoid undesirable vibrations, he packed his guitar's body with wood, rags, and even plaster of Paris. But it didn't work. The noise remained, but his guitar grew heavier. He became desperate at a little Wisconsin club one night. He tried to enhance the sound by attaching a phonograph needle to his guitar. It was only a short-term solution. He required an actual solution. Then it dawned upon him. The guitar itself was the issue, not the pickups or the amplifiers. It became evident to him by the late 1930s. The guitar's hollow body was to blame. It transformed the entire instrument into an echo chamber of sound, amplifying not only the song but also each tiny tremor. He needed to completely eliminate the hollow body if he wanted pure, regulated sound. In 1941, he constructed a first for the world. The log, he called it. As the name implies, it's a straightforward 4x4 piece of wood with pickups and a guitar neck attached. He fastened an old Epiphone hollow body's sides to it to make it appear less odd. They were merely for show, though. The strong wood core was the true source of power. Just pure, continuous sustain, no more feedback, no more unpleasant vibrations. Les Paul made a move that would alter the course of music history in 1943 when he relocated to Los Angeles. After Bing Crosby urged him to establish a recording studio, Paul transformed his Hollywood home's garage into an innovative workspace that was unheard of at the time. It was more than just a room with gear. It was there that he explored the limits of sound. He constructed his own recording equipment, including constructing a makeshift recording lathe out of a Cadillac flywheel. He was searching for something novel. Something that no one had ever heard. He played with overdubbing, sound-on-sound recording, and speed manipulation as he experimented with sound layering over the course of the following 2 years. With each new finding, he got closer to the sound he had named the new sound. Because of his experiments and his ability to give regular recordings a larger, deeper, and more alive feel, musicians began to flock to his studio. Paul created music, not just performed it. He recorded a single sound layer using acetate discs. After which it was played again while another was added. He repeated the procedure until the music was just the way he wanted it to be. It was not simple. Before certain tunes became flawless, hundreds of attempts were required. His song Lover surprised people in 1948. Industry. He performed each of the 8 guitar layers on it. It was a sound unlike anything else. It was rejected by Columbia Records because they were unsure about what to do with it. However, the song became a smash when it was released because Capitol Records recognized the vision. Paul was engaged in more than simply music making in his garage. He was revolutionizing the composition process. Multi-track recording, which would soon become commonplace in the business, was founded on his methods. He was creating his reputation as a performer and innovator at the same time. With Bing Crosby, he recorded "It's Been a Long, Long Time" in 1945. People were getting back again with their loved ones after being apart for years as the war came to a conclusion. The music does a wonderful job of capturing that emotion. The warmth and subtlety of Paul's guitar work added a depth that enhanced Crosby's vocals. In addition to hitting the top of the Billboard charts upon its release, the song remained there for weeks. In addition to being a musician, Crosby recognized Paul as a trailblazer. He handed Paul a reel-to-reel tape recorder, Ampex Model 200A, one of the first of its kind to be sold commercially, in 1948. Right away, Paul disassembled it and reassembled it, adding a spare playback head that let him record more than one track without deleting the others. This experiment wasn't your typical one. It was an innovation that would permanently alter the music industry. Then, just when it appeared like everything was coming together, catastrophe struck. Paul was traveling through Oklahoma when an ice storm turned the road into a sheet of glass on January 13, 1948. His vehicle skidded before colliding. He had broken elbows and right arms. According to the doctors, they were forced to amputate him. There was no worse news for a guitarist, but Paul declined. Rather, he persuaded the surgeons to permanently angle his arm, one which would enable him to continue playing. The decision was unpleasant, but it was made without hesitation. For him, music was his life, and he had no intention of abandoning it. Over a year was needed for recovery. He was able to think but not play. While he was in the hospital, he sketched up new ideas for recording. He had been playing about with multi-track approaches, but now he had time to refine them in his imagination before putting them into practice. There was Mary Ford after that. She was raised in a musical household and possessed a voice that could elevate any tune. Les Paul, who was already gaining popularity as a guitarist, was introduced to her by country singer Gene Autry in 1945. She was a fantastic fit for Les's musical vision, in addition to being a talented vocalist. They began collaborating, and eventually their relationship developed into more. They were wed by 1949. At this point, their personal and professional lives were fully entangled. They rose to become one of the most popular musical acts in the early 1950s. Hitting the charts. Songs like Via Con Dios and How High the Moon dominated the airwaves and were at the top of the charts for weeks at a time. 6 million recordings were sold by them in 1951 alone. At the time, they had a sound that was unique. Les played more than simply guitar. By manipulating and layering it, he created an almost symphonic effect. Mary had more than a melody in her voice. More than one person could ever sing live, it was multiplied, harmonized with itself, and molded into something larger. Not merely skill was the key to their sound. It was technology. Les Paul never stopped striving to push the boundaries of what music could be. He used tape speed to play hitherto unheard of sound effects and overdubbing. He used their homes as recording locations rather than large studios, converting hotel rooms and garages into temporary recording areas. By positioning microphones near Mary's mouth, he gave her voice a personal warmth. In their New Jersey home, he carved an echo chamber directly into the granite of the mountains below. Every element was thoughtfully designed to give their music a deeper, fuller, and more sophisticated sound than anything else on the radio. They had an impact outside of the studio as well. They made their music available on television in 1953 while Mary Ford and Les Paul were at home. 5 times a week, with a 5-minute show. It was more than simply a show, it was a glimpse into their lives, featuring people performing in their own homes. Viewers had the impression that they were there with them, witnessing two individuals who were more than just partners in life as well as on stage. It was among the first kind of reality television, long before the term was coined. Les Paul's creation, the Les Paul Guitarizer, was arguably the most astounding. In order to record their live performances, he created a gadget that allowed him to play on stage and activate pre-recorded songs. It gave the impression that they were playing with a whole band. Despite the fact that it was only them two, viewers were in awe. They didn't realize they were listening to more than simply live music. Modern technology was combined with live music. A significant event in the history of electric guitars occurred in 1952. Gibson, one of the most reputable guitar makers, partnered with Les Paul, an inventor and musician who had spent years experimenting with guitar design. Les had previously constructed a solid body prototype that he named the Log, demonstrating the ability to create a more regulated, clearer tone using a guitar constructed from a single piece of wood. However, for his concept to be fully realized, a large corporation had to support it. Gibson was able to help with it. At the moment, with the growing success of Fender's Telecaster, Gibson realized they needed a reaction. They proposed to Les Paul that he design a new guitar that would bear his name and threaten Fender's hegemony. After months of development, the first Gibson Les Paul model was created with Les's active participation in the design. The combination of its carved maple top and thick mahogany body produced a warm, rich tone with remarkable sustain. Les recommended a gold finish since he wanted the guitar to be the focal point. As a result, the guitar with the now famous gold top looked as daring as it sounded. The first 2 production units were shipped to Les Paul on May 20, 1952. He presented Gibson's latest work to the world when he performed them live at the Paramount. Theater in New York a month later. At the Astoria Waldorf Hotel. This was not merely a product launch. This was the start of something far larger. Whenever Les Paul and his wife, Mary Ford, played, they made sure the guitar was heard and seen. Les wasn't merely recommending it. Each time he performed, he demonstrated its capabilities. This acquisition was equally unprecedented in terms of finances. Les Paul owned the patents for certain of the design features, such as the distinctive wrap-over bridge, and got royalties from each guitar sold. However, there were some flaws in the original guitar model. It was challenging for players to bend strings with the original tailpiece, which was created by Ted McCarty of Gibson. For some, it was frustrating. In the following years, Gibson continued to refine the design, eventually replacing the original bridge in 1955 with a more sophisticated tunematic system. Players were able to precisely modify their intonation thanks to this minor adjustment, which had a significant impact. The Stratocaster featured a clean, contemporary appearance, were lighter, and were more reasonably priced despite their daring design and Les Paul's influence. The Les Paul was viewed by many guitarists as being overly heavy and outdated. Gibson made the decision to stop producing the original single cutaway model in 1960 because sales had fallen so dramatically. They unveiled a new model they called the SG, which had 2 cutaways and a slimmer body. They first retained Les Paul's name on it, but Les didn't like the new look. He requested that Gibson take his name from the model by 1963. Just when the original Les Paul was dying, something unexpected occurred. A Sunburst Les Paul standard was first played on live by Rolling Stones member Keith Richards in 1964. The other guitarists noticed. Soon, one was being used by Eric Clapton for his renowned recordings with the Bluesbreakers and John Mayall. Mike Bloomfield joined an increasing number of rock and blues musicians who were enamored with the guitar's rich, booming tone. After noticing the change, Gibson took a risk. They brought back Les Paul's original design in 1968. This guitar wasn't just any guitar. The growing influence of rock music was symbolized by it. By the 1970s, Les Paul's legacy had been solidified by icons like Slash, Pete Townshend, and Jimmy Page. Turned into some of the most precious instruments ever produced. Early models from 1958 are used now. Turned what was previously regarded as a flop into one of the most sought-after guitars of all time, fetching hundreds of thousands of dollars in 1960. Mary Ford and Les Paul used to make the ideal musical duo. They worked together to create magic on stage. Off-stage, they were having marital problems. Their relationship had become acrimonious and difficult by the early 1960s, despite the fact that they had been together since 1949. Les Paul sought for divorce with her in 1963, claiming she had multiple affairs. Donald Hatfield, a contractor, and vocalist Foy Willing are among them. He claimed she publicly boasted about her romances, insulted him, and ignored their kids. Heartbreak and controversy characterized what had begun as a musical love story. Following the divorce, Les Paul stopped performing. It wasn't only his marriage that ended when he lost Mary Ford. His collaboration on music came to an end. And something was lacking without her. He was also aware of the changes in the music industry. The dominant music was rock and roll. Furthermore, his musical style was no longer the focal point of anything. Instead of attempting to compete with the newest generation of artists, he focused on his lifelong passion: invention. Les Paul had always been more than just a musician. As a creator, he was constantly looking for new ways to enhance sound quality. During this period, he developed a gadget known as the pulverizer, which allowed musicians to manipulate recorded sounds straight from their instruments. In the studio, he experimented with recording methods that would influence contemporary music. He wasn't performing, but he was still making a significant impact on the industry that most people were unaware of. His body was failing him, though, as he was developing new technology. Guitar playing for years had worn it down. He had arthritis that made it difficult to move his fingers. He couldn't even enjoy the music he loved because of his hearing loss. This would have been the last straw for a lot of musicians. It was just another obstacle to overcome for Les Paul. To accommodate his constraints, he modified his playing style and discovered new methods that enabled him to continue creating music in his own unique style. He never completely vanished from the stage, even if he avoided it for years. He recorded Chester and Lester and Guitar Monsters with the renowned guitarist Chet Atkins in 1976 and 1978. These records served as a reminder of his brilliance. He continued to demonstrate his status as one of the greatest musicians of all time despite his lack of frequent appearances. Then, a surprising event occurred. Les Paul made the decision to play live again in the late 1980s. He was in his 70s at this point, when most artists had long ago retired. In 1995, however, he began performing monthly at the Iridium Jazz Club in New York City, rather than slowing down. People flocked to the facility to see him perform every Monday night. The individual who had permanently altered music was visited by fans, musicians, and even celebrities. He was awarded one of music's greatest distinctions in 1988. He was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, joining such greats as Bob Dylan and the Beatles. In New York City, the event took place at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Was one to remember. One of the greatest guitarists of all time, Jeff Beck, had the honor of inducting him. Beck revealed something on stage that many people were previously aware of. Les Paul had taught him a great deal. Paul had influenced his guitar playing, his methods, and even his perspective on the instrument. It was an act of unadulterated reverence and a reminder that Les Paul's influence went much beyond his compositions. Nearly 20 years later, he earned 2 Grammy Awards, demonstrating his impact once more. There was more to his CD Les Paul and Friends, American-made world played than just a mix of songs. Working with musicians like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Keith Richards, and Sting, it was in homage to his legacy. The Grammys he won that evening were for 69 Freedom Special's Best Rock Instrumental Performance and Caravan's Best Pop Instrumental Performance. It was amazing to witness. A man who has influenced music for decades, winning significant honors and demonstrating the everlasting nature of his sound. Music wasn't the only thing that made him famous. He received his induction into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2005. This placed him in a unique position, recognized for both his technical brilliance and creative ability. His innovations in music technology revolutionized the field. His early solid-body electric guitar prototype, called the Log, served as the model for several contemporary models, such as the well-known Gibson Les Paul. By enabling musicians to precisely overlay various sounds, his contributions to multi-track recording revolutionized the process of creating music. These were not minor enhancements. Industry. Les Paul continued to pursue his passions even in his latter years. He gave weekly performances at the Iridium Jazz Club in New York, chatting with the audience while strumming his guitar. His contributions to music and culture were further recognized in 2007 when President George W. Bush presented him with the National Medal of Arts. Documentaries such as Les Paul and Chasing Sound chronicled his remarkable life and shown how his inquisitiveness and tenacity influenced a whole musical era. Pneumonia difficulties caused him to die on August 12, 2009, at the age of 94. Had already been recorded throughout history. He received tributes from musicians all throughout the world. Slash described him as lively and brimming with good vibes. U2's Edge claimed that without him, rock music as we know it wouldn't exist. In his hometown of Waukesha, Wisconsin, where he was buried, fans continue to pay tribute to him by visiting exhibits such as the Les Paul Experience. But even after his death in 2009, his impact continued. He had tens of millions of dollars in estate value. Founded on innovative patents, guitar royalties, and an assortment of rare instruments. Record-breaking auctions, family conflicts, and court cases followed, all of which continue to have an impact on his legacy today. Gibson was one of the main contributors to his money. He had a contract that paid him $5 for each instrument sold when the first Les Paul guitar was produced in 1952. Although that may not seem like much, each instrument would cost about $60 when adjusted for current values. More than 1 million Les Paul guitars had been sold by the time of his death, but matters became difficult when Gibson momentarily withdrew the model in the 1960s. Late 1950s vintage versions rose to become some of the most costly guitars ever made. Les Paul's fortune was not only derived from guitars, however a well-preserved 1959 burst can currently fetch over $400,000. The recording of music was influenced by his thoughts. Technology that enables musicians to combine sounds in previously unheard of ways. In addition to being significant, many concepts were patented and required payment from businesses in order to be used. Although the precise figures are not available to the public, these patents generated significant revenue for many years. The guitars he kept for himself came next. His own collection contained artifacts from the history of music. The Log was the most famous. He constructed a prototype in 1941 that served as the basis for electric guitars with solid bodies. However, the most valuable? His 1952 Les Paul Gold Top was that. Played on television during the 1950s, it was Les Paul's first production model ever. It exceeded all expectations when it was eventually put up for sale. It sold for an estimated $100,000. It sold for $930,000. That was only the first auction. Back in 2013, the extraordinary sale, an auction of more than 150 objects from his estate, was held by Christie's 4 years after his passing. Not only did scribbled lyrics, early recording equipment, and experimental prototypes fall under the hammer, but so did guitars. One of the most talked about pieces was the iconic Greenie 1959 Les Paul, which was once owned by Fleetwood's Max Peter Green before being purchased for $2 million by Kirk Hammett of Metallica. Every object has a backstory, and collectors would pay anything to possess a piece of history. Not everyone was content. The decisions made by his son, Gene, who was in charge of the estate, caused controversy. Many believed that vintage guitars, such as the Gold Top, ought to have been kept in museums or in the family. Asserting that his father didn't want his legacy to be preserved, Gene justified the transactions. He desired for his art to be seen by everyone. The altercations continued. Conflicts arose about how to manage Gibson's royalties. There were family members who desired to reinvest. Some wanted the funds dispersed. In 2021, Gibson's victory in a dispute against Heritage Guitars cemented its trademark on the Les Paul body shape, further complicating the matter. More revenue was expected as a result. There would be more arguments as well. Then his recording patents became a point of contention. Some wished to aggressively license them in order to make them a reliable source of income. Others resisted because they believed it would damage his standing as an inventor.